Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Bill Wilson, who's the president and CEO of Wilson Financial Group, and we'll be talking about how to get to and through retirement. Bill, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me. How are you doing today?
Hey, you're welcome. Doing great. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. I love how you phrased the title of this topic, how to get to and through, because I have a feeling that a lot of people think just how to get to retirement. And so I want to hear your perspectives on that. But before we dive in, give us a little bit of your story and your background and how did you get into financial services?
Well, I'm from Chicago, Illinois, born and raised, and certainly I didn't pursue the financial service sector when I first got into school. It was more, I enjoyed architecture, and so I have my, I certainly go like everybody else, you go to different school, but I got my degree in my Bachelor of Science degree. After a couple of years of college and junior college, I went in the military. I was a member of the United States Army Parachute Team, the Golden Knights, which still exists today. So if you've gone to see an air show across the country, would it be the Thunderbirds, Blue Angels? Most likely, you saw some parachutists, black and gold parachutes. I was on that team, and it was great. And then as I got out of the service in '77, I used a GI Bill and finished my degree at University of Illinois, and started to work. And one of the I guess a separate entity of the city, Chicago Park District, where the Chicago Bears play, that's Park District property. I started to, work in a position there, and a buddy of mine I've known since first grade. Think about that. How many people you know that you still communicate with since first grade? And I've gone to school with him, to church with him, to service with him, and all that. And so he introduced financial services, and I kind of took it slow. I'd started part-time, but I made more money part-time and full-time, and decided to change careers, and that was in '84. And I've been doing that ever since, and I love it.
That's just awesome. It's neat to have lifelong friends, relationships, and that tells us that you value that a whole lot, meaning there is something to be said for someone that doesn't treat people like another number. You treat people like a relationship, a friend, and not just let's just see what we can get done here. So I think that is just spectacular. So let's dive into getting to and through retirement. How do you guide your clients to create a plan to get not only to retirement, but through retirement?
Well, as I do public speaking or if I'm talking to somebody one-on-one, I always use the analogy of Mount Everest. And I'll share with people, I say, as people have, if that's on their bucket list, I ask the audience, when it comes to climbing that summit, how many of you think that if someone didn't make it, they died going up to the summit, or did they die going down the mountain? Okay.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is most of them die going down the mountain. So, getting to retirement is going up to the summit. You work, you've got a job, a 401k, a 403b, a 457, whatever. You put money away, you raise a family, you do all that, and you finally get to that summit. But now the paycheck stops. You're now going to take this nest egg, and I always tell people that income equals lifestyle. But now you're going. Now you got to go through retirement. Hopefully you've done a good enough job where you got a good 30, life expectancy. I think somebody at one time won a Nobel Prize that stated, "Hey, 6% in stocks and 4% in bonds should produce at a 4% withdrawal." At least a 30-year window for life expectancy to have income come in. Well, as we all know, those rules are out the window because of the volatility of the market. So I share with people, your biggest challenge is going through retirement, because we're going to have situations of inflation. We're going to have situations of different administrations, taxes. We're going to also talk about health, because that's certainly an enemy. So you put that all together, getting to retirement is important, but getting through retirement is everything, so you get to the finish line.
We could probably talk for 3.5 hours just on that opening point right there, because it's so critical. And I want to unpack a couple things that brought to my mind. I love your analogy of the mountain climbing, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I got to the summit, yay, and then now getting down, nope, that's the hard part.
Yep.
In reality, in relation to retirement, I think a lot of times people would think, well, what's the difference between getting to and through? Well, there's a big dotted line there that's of many, many years. You get to retirement at whatever age you're going to choose, and that's a whole decision process there. But how long are you in retirement to get through it? Is it 10 years, 20, 30, 40?
Right.
And I think that becomes the really calculated, guesstimate or calculated number there that you're going to need to sit down with clients and say, listen, let's talk about this, because lifespan and longevity, and we're taking better care of ourselves, and the healthcare system is better. How do you help your clients realize that, yes, we need to accumulate some money to get to retirement and retire at the right age, but how long will that last?
Yeah, when I sit down with people, I'll ask them, well, tell me about your parents. How long did they live? In my case, unfortunately, my father died at 66. He was a smoker. But my mother, 12 days short of 91. And my dad's brother and sister lived in their 90s. So, there's certainly, hopefully, longevity in the family. So I asked the couple about that. And of course, what's important for them as far as the income goes. What exactly do they want for income? If we had the magic wand, if you're making some good money, let's say you're making $160,000 a year. I can give one example a little bit later of a couple that, as the husband sat down with me, he was kind of embarrassed. He goes, I wish I'd started that 401k a lot sooner. I make good money, but I know when I finally retire, I'm not going to have enough income that's going to match what I was doing. I was working, because we live on our net, right? So, he realizes that he's a little behind the eight ball. And so his wife is putting all her money into the retirement plan she has to kind of, catch up. So, I always share with people, take that rule of 100. It's just sort of a rule of thumb. Take the number 100 minus your age. And, that's how much you should have really in risk. And based on what your age are, that's the percentage you should have with safety in mind. Because the older you get, the more it's important to have safety in mind, to make sure that money's going to be there for longevity. Making sure that, those income streams are continuing to come in no matter what kind of hiccup we have in the economy.
And I'm sure you would agree with this too. It's like, okay, here's the numbers. We put them in with pencil, then we kind of reevaluate and put them in with pen, but we're still going to verify and check annually, that kind of thing. And we probably want to have a little buffer in there. So if we need X number of dollars to last X number of years, we want to have a little bit of buffer. And I think that's super important. How do you diversify what you're giving recommendations for? Because I feel like a lot of people hear that word diversify and they go, oh, I'm diversified because I've got money in 20 different stocks. Yeah, but they're in stocks and they're in the same sector. And so where do you guide that conversation on making sure you've got to spread out for safety?
Well, obviously there's a, as I ask some questions, there's an obvious answer. How important is to protect your money? And so I always use what's called the ABCs. As we learn as a children, we learn our ABCs, and I want to keep it simple for people. So, A is the bank. We certainly have bills to pay and that, but you wouldn't put all your retirement money in there. And why? Because you might have safety with the bank, but you literally are going to have a challenge when it comes to growth. And then B is an account that I'll talk a bit later, but that's an account that, like the bank, never lose money, but the returns are better and guaranteed in some cases, and the income streams from that are consistent. And then C is securities. You can make all you can make, but you can also lose. So it has to be a mix. That's why I use that rule of 100. How much of this portfolio you have, which most likely, when I sit down with people, they've got their money in A and they got their money in C. They're clueless what B is. And so it's really a combination of the two. I tell people I do two things very well: the growth of money and protection of money. And so, when I sit down with people, you can't have it all. You want gains, you want liquidity, you want protection. As I'm sitting with people who are about to retire, they want to protect that nest egg because they can't go back. Their job is done. Whatever they've done now, as far as getting to the summit, that has to last. And now we're going down that mountain. We're going through retirement, and there's many different factors that can affect that nest egg as they get older.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the whole thing to keep in mind as much as possible is safety and security and all of that. And,
Right.
there's an age where people would go, oh, look, I can have a little bit more volatility and weather the storm in my 20s, 30s, maybe 40s. But at a certain age, we need to start circling the wagons and getting a little bit more conservative, right? So what are some of the things that you need to make sure of age-wise when you start moving money into more of those conservative accounts?
Well, if we're going to focus on making sure we have income that we can definitely count, I always share with people that I always tell people this, it's not the assets you've accumulated that's going to give you the lifestyle. You might have stocks, you might have bonds, you might have this, you might have that, but that isn't the answer. The answer is what is the income that those assets will produce on a regular, reliable, consistent basis, because income is lifestyle. And so
Yep.
if I took a circle and it was everything they had, and I asked the question, well, how much do you want to protect? Of course, the answer was I want to protect it all. But we also
Yep.
got to consider inflation. We also have to consider some growth on that money. And so it's kind of a combination. I sort of do a pie. I'll have money for emergencies. That's important. I always tell people there's three things when it comes to money. You need money for income, you need money for emergencies, you need money for growth. And so through those three, I put a plan together, a customized plan that they can certainly, see clearly where they are. And I put their financial life right in front of them on the computer, a big screen. I take all the information, and I'm gonna consider a couple things. What about inflation? What about taxes? How far can your accounts, which you have currently, before I make any adjustments, how far will that go based on good times in the market, bad times in the market? And so I try to open their minds up and kind of get the blinders to kind of get opened up more about what can take place. And certainly health. The reason why people were in nursing homes is because, they're having issues with activities of daily living.
Yep.
Mike, you and I this morning, we woke up, we went to the toilet, then we took a shower, then we ate, then we dressed, then we went from one room to another. And of course, we're not having accidents at the moment we're in a diaper or whatever, but those are activities of daily living. If you can't do those, then you need care all the time. So what about the health element? What have you done to plan for that? Because sure as shooting, something's going to happen health wise. That's why I asked about their parents. And, in my family tree, on my mother's side, it's heart disease. On my father's side, it's Parkinson's. So when you put all that together, what could happen? Yes, we're living longer lives. We're taking care of ourselves. We're working out. But again, health is an element that if you don't have a plan for that, that is going to eat into what you've worked hard for.
Yeah, 100%. Having the plan and then following the plan and then checking the plan, because
Correct.
when you need to make updates, it doesn't mean the plan initially was wrong. It just means there might have been some external circumstances that
Sure.
have impacted it. Oh, look, inflation went up, or oh, look, taxes went up. So having that plan, checking it. You mentioned health and things, and I know that we all say, oh, it won't happen to me until it does. But sometimes those challenges come up. Long-term care is a big thing. And I've heard some statistics that are pretty staggering, like over 70% of everyone will need some type of long-term care. And there's many levels and all that. But suffice it to say, how do you guide your clients to be prepared for that? Because 6, 8, 10,000 a month potentially could really punch some big holes in that retirement bucket.
Well, if I was in front of an audience and it came down to health issues and I asked people, well, where would you want your care to be at? Most people say, well,
Yep.
at home. I don't want to go to a nursing
Yeah.
home. I want to be at home. But there's still some costs. On my website, people go to wilsonfinancialgrp.com. On my homepage and scroll down, there is a picture of the United States, and Nationwide supports this. And you can literally take the cursor and go to any state you live in. You will know what the costs are today for home care. You'll know what it is for private, semi-private room, private room. You would know all that. You would know also if you were assisted living. Those are things that eventually, those are decisions that are going to have to be made in most cases. And when that does happen, well, do you have the dollars to do that? So I'm not a believer in a standalone long-term care policy, because it's the old saying, use it or lose it. I do asset-based long-term care, meaning if you do need it, it's there. And if you don't, your money still is passed down to the estate. And how important is that? Because if you're married, maybe one spouse is going to be sick, the other one's going to be healthy. What about the surviving spouse? Because in most cases, when death occurs or health goes bad, somebody's going to suffer, okay? And especially at death, there's an income loss. So it's all about those things for planning properly so that no matter what takes place, you've got plan B.
I like your reference there to like the old school standalone long-term care policies. I've heard a little bit about them where they're either outdated and not many are available, but even if they are, look twice because it's similar to your car insurance. At the end of the year, if you didn't have any wrecks, do you call up your car insurance agent and go, give me my premiums back? Of course
that
not.
Won't happen. Yeah.
And with those types of long-term care, if you didn't need it this year, good, you're in good health, but those premiums are gone. Whereas these other kind of hybrid policies with the kind of rider kind of a setup, if you need it, it's there. If not, then the money's still cranking away doing what it was meant to do.
Yeah. Well, there's people too that say, Bill, my health's not the best in the world. I wouldn't qualify for that. But I share with them, what if we could put a plan together that your income would double and you don't have to prove insurability? There are plans that'll do that for you. Okay. But it's just a matter of understanding that health is an issue. If I could give good health and guarantee good health, the line would go around the block a few times over. Right. But that's a challenge that we have. And that's again, going down the mountain. It's going through retirement. That is going to be an element, whether you like it or not, it's going to happen.
I've done some hiking with my family and you kind of hike up one way, not, big mountains. I'm in Colorado and we haven't done any 14ers, but you end the hike and you come back down and it's kind of a little bit of a downgrade and you're kind of clipping along a little faster and you got down there quicker and it was a fun fast walk. In your case, with the Everest example and in the example of money, boy, any little bit of momentum and bad weather and some of these things that can catch you by surprise really are devastating. So it makes me think of this question. What are some of the biggest financial risks people make and that might catch them by surprise when they're now in retirement and trying to get through retirement, but they didn't plan for?
Well, you got inflationary risk, right? Because things cost more as we get older. You certainly have, portfolio risk. You might, a lot of times people always like making money, but nobody likes to lose money. And so you might have a trend, you have a good run in the market and it's doing well. But again, your broker is not going to say, Mike, hey, you've done a great job. Let's take some of this profit and let's put it over here. No, they're going to continue to encourage you to stay the course. I often share with people, remember, this is your money, not the broker's money. You're going to have to determine what's important for you. Lifestyle is everything. And like anything else, when two people are together and they've got income streams coming from both sides, all of a sudden health is an issue, whatever. All of a sudden lifestyle starts to change a little bit. Things you weren't anticipating all of a sudden start to come into play. And these are things you just got to really, zone in on. And sometimes I find people are, you got to kind of give them a wake-up call on that. They're in denial, thinking, hey, it's great, the market's doing fine. Whether they're a fan of the administration currently or not, doesn't matter. It's doing it. I have to kind of wake them up a little bit that, hey, there's something around the corner that you might not have considered. And again, we got to go through that to get to the finish line. And what about some of the things I'm talking about? How important is that to you?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I tell you, Bill, this has been some real eye-opening thought processes. If someone is interested in learning a little bit more and reaching out and connecting with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, two ways. They can go to my website, which is wilsonfinancialgrp.com. They can also call me at my office at 480-220-3449.
Bill, thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure chatting with you.
Well, Mike, thank you for your time and considering what we did today. I appreciate being to reach out to people.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.